Welcome back, everybody. I said I would come back, and so here I am. Let me put my headphones in really quick so we can get started. Hopefully, everybody can hear me and see me okay. I won't know that until one of you guys come in the chat, but hopefully, we'll get some back of our old crew back on and let everybody know hello, hello, everybody, as you're coming in. Glad to see you tonight. This is just late night bullshit with Scarlet, so I called it open air late night. Because it's just open air and I'm using it right. So that's what we're doing. But I've got a few things to talk about tonight, right? So that's why I wanted to come back on, even though it's late, um, even though we said we were done for the night. Um, I wanted to come back and just talk about a few things that I've been seeing lately that to me are highly concerning. Okay. And we're going to talk about an article tonight. Let's see if I can find, I just had it open, but I'll see if I can find it. Let's see. It's about the Great Reset and the Internet of People, they called it. Um, and there's a lot of people talking about this Great Reset. And this all started when this came out of Davos. Okay, so the World Economic Forum came up with this, coined this term, right? And there is an article from Modern Diplomacy that I want to read to you guys. And this wasn't the article that I wanted to read, but I feel like it'll cover the gist. And this is an intelligence post, okay? And this is COVID-19 lockdowns are in lockstep with the Great Reset. On October 2019, a pandemic simulation exercise called Event 201, a pandemic simulation exercise, a collaborative effort between Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, World Economic Forum, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, concluded that a hypothetical new coronavirus may end up killing at least 65 million people worldwide within 18 months of an outbreak. When COVID 19 emerged from Wuhan 2 months later, scientists were rushing to generate similar alarmist forecasts using a variety of questionable scientific models. Researchers from the Imperial College of London, for instance, approximated death tolls of 500,000 in the UK and 2 million in the USA by October. And here we are, and we don't have 2 million. To follow these metastases of the global vaccine mania, the imperial model was predictably tidied up with the help of Microsoft. While the scientific models are admittedly fallible, one would nonetheless be hard pressed to justify the endless string of contradictions, discrepancies, and willful amnesia in the global pandemic narrative. In fact, one should question whether COVID 19 even deserves the tag of a pandemic. According to the United States Center for Disease Control, the CDC, the updated age group survival rates for COVID 19 happen to be ages 0 through 19, 99.997%, 20 to 49, 99.98%, 50 through 69, 99.5%, and 70 plus, 94.6%. So the mortality rates are only slightly higher than the human toll from the seasonal flu and are, in fact, lower than many ailments for the same age cohorts. If the CDC statistics don't lie, what kind of science have we been subjected to? Was it the science of mass mediated hysteria? Are there are other troubling questions yet unanswered. Whatever happened to the theory of bats or pangolins being the source of COVID-19? Who was patient zero? And we answered that question, and he was a man in Wuhan who had been in hospital for a lung condition and was going to have surgery. And then he came down with like this mystery illness. And then they moved him to a bunch of different hospital wards. And then everybody started getting the coronavirus. So patient zero was this guy, but he was sick before, and there was no actual like proof that coronavirus is what he had until after he had been moved to like 3 different places. So that's who patient zero is. I can actually answer that question because we did a lot of in-depth research here at the beginning of the year. Why was there a concerted media agitprop against the prophylactic use of hydroxychloroquine that was backed by the Indian Council of Medical Research, the ICMR, no less? Why did Professor Neil Ferguson, who had led Imperial's contagion modeling, repeatedly breach lockdown measures to meet his paramour right after his recommendations were used to justify draconian lockdowns worldwide, which still continue to today? Most damning yet, why are Western media and scientific establishments dismissive of Russia's Sputnik 5 vaccine or Sputnik V? I don't know if they're using Roman numeral or V. After all, Moscow's credibility, both scientific and otherwise, is on the line here. In a real pandemic, nobody would care where an effective remedy comes from. The virus does not care about borders or geopolitics, so why should we politicize the origins of an antidote? Perhaps what we're really dealing with is a case of mass corona psychosis, as Belarusian President Andrei Lukashenko aptly called it, who benefits from global lockdowns that are destabilizing all facets of society. Following four great undercurrents may provide a clue. The Great Deflection. As the author had warned for more than a decade, the world is staring at a confluence of risk overloads, socioeconomic meltdowns, and a second Great Depression. For the ruling classes, COVID-19 is fortuitously deflecting public attention away from the disastrous consequences of decades of economic mismanagement and wealth fractionation. The consolidation of big tech with big media has created an Orwellian world where the collective hysteria is shifting Loki from boogeyman like Russia to those who disagree with the pandemic narrative. We have entered a new normal where Pyongyang, North Korea, affords more ambulatory freedom than Melbourne, Australia. While rioting and mass demonstrations by assorted radicals are given a free pass, even encouraged by leaders of the West, Facebook posts questioning lockdowns are deemed subversive. This is a world where Australian blue shirts beat up women, manhandle a pregnant woman in her own home, and perform wolf pack policing on an elderly lady in a park. Yet the premier of the Australian state of Victoria remains unfazed by the unflattering moniker of Kim Jong-dan, just like I called Tim Jong Walls. See, there's a reason. The corona totalitarianism is unsurprisingly most pronounced in the Anglosphere and its dependencies. After all, these nations are staring at socioeconomic bankruptcies of unprecedented proportions vis-a-vis their counterparts. Even their own governments are being systematically undermined from within. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security, created in the aftermath of 9/11 to combat terrorism, is now providing $10 million grants to organizations in which supposedly combat far-right extremism and white supremacy. This will further radicalize leftist malcontents who are raising down U.S. cities and its economies in the name of social justice. There is, however, a curious rationale behind its inane policies. The following section illustrates the great wealth transfer. While the circus continues, the bread is thinning out. And see, and I've been saying, give us bread for our circuses. Like, okay? The top 0.001% instead of bankruptcy, as recent trends indicated, Silicon Valley and affiliated monopolies are notching up with record profits, along with record social media censorship. U.S. billionaires raked in $434 billion in the first 2 months of lockdown alone. The more lockdowns, the more wealth accrued to the techno elite. As tens of millions of individuals and small business face bankruptcy by Christmas, the remote work revolution is gifting a multi-billion-dollar jackpot to the likes of Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Azure, Microsoft, and AWS. Amazon cloud ecosystems, among others, have expanded 50% since the beginning of the pandemic. In the face of such runaway health fractionation, panoptic contact tracing tools from big tech are increasingly employed to pacify restive populations. And of course, to prevent a second or third or nth wave of COVID-19 for our collective good. In the meantime, big banks, big pharma, big tech, and other monopolies are getting lavish central bank bailouts or stimulus packages to gobble up struggling smaller enterprises. COVID-19 is a gift that never stops giving to a select few. But how will the techno oligarchy maintain a degree of social credibility in a world with impoverished and tumultuous world? The great philanthropy. Oligarchic philanthropy will be a dominant feature of this VUCA decade. According to the recent Guardian report, philanthropic foundations have multiplied exponentially in the past 2 decades, controlling a war chest worth more than 1.5 trillion. That is sufficient to bankroll a horde of experts, NGOs, industry lobbies, media, and fact checkers worldwide. Large sums can also be distributed rapidly to undermine governments. The laws concerning scientific empiricism are no longer static and immutable. They must dance in tandem with the funding. Those who scream fake news are usually its foremost peddlers. This is yet another new normal, which actually predated COVID-19 by decades. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the BMGF, is a prime example for how oligarchic philanthropy works. Since 2000, it has donated more than 45 billion to charitable causes, and the chunk of this is designed to control the global media narrative. The Guardian, rather tellingly, credits the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for helping eradicate polio, despite contrary reports of wanton procedural abuses, child death tolls, and poverty exploitations which routinely mar the foundation's vaccination programs. Bill Gates even interprets vaccine philanthropy in terms of 20-to-1 return on investments, he effused to CNBC last year. 20-to-1 investment, you guys. Now, you see why they're trying to vaccinate the whole world with this coronavirus vaccine, that it's untested, not tested by saline placebo, not safety tested. Do you know that the current numbers of 94, it was only 94 people that they tested this new vaccine on? 94 people that they say it is now 90% or 95% effective. In the Johnson, I believe it's Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, who have the two vaccines. Johnson & Johnson only tested on 94 people out of the 48,000 who are enrolled in the trial. Really think about that we're basing a number that we're going to give supposedly this vaccine to the whole world on off 94 people. Now really think, like, honestly, 94 people are going to determine the fate of everybody else getting this and the fate of the safety recommendations. And that's unacceptable. If you have a pool of 48,000 people, we should be looking at all 48,000 for adverse reactions or events. Combing over every little detail, every sniffle, every weird feeling that they have, all of that should be documented, but it's not. As for the BMGF's alleged polio success, officials now fear that a dangerous new strain could jump continents. Oh, hopefully you guys can still hear me while I try to reset. There we go. Just needed to move the phone a little bit, and hopefully that did well. But I'm trying the best I can here. Okay. So I'm just in my living room. Like, I apologize. But this was really important because I was like, wait, this like clicked so many things in my head while I was reading this, you know? Absolutely, Michael Davies, effective versus efficacy. Efficacy is the important thing, and they are lying, and they're going to continue to lie. But yet the evidence is being put right in our faces. But yet people, you know, the way that the media has even been portraying this vaccine has been like, oh, it's our only hope. It's our savior. It's going to be a bright light in a dark world. Like, I've heard that so many times on quote unquote mainstream media that it's kind of upsetting at this point that they're putting all their eggs in that basket, because I don't think all the eggs should be put in that basket, right? Because we shouldn't just put all of our hopes into one thing, especially something as vaccines that are so fallible and are so damaging to the human body, especially this one going to be mRNA based. It's a big deal. So they say after spending 16 billion over 30 years to eradicate polio, international health bodies which work closely with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have accidentally reintroduced the disease to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. Poverty, hunger, and desperation will spawn a tangible degree of public gratitude despite elite philanthropy's entrenched bias towards elite institutions and causes. By the Guardian's own admission, British millionaires gave 1.4 billion pounds to the arts and just 222 million to alleviating poverty in the 10-year period to 2017. Contrast this with the annual 10 billion earmarked by the philanthropic pool for ideological persuasion in the US alone. The rabble worth their weight for only the potential havoc they can wreak. There's enough money floating around to reduce our cities to bedlams of anarchy, as seen in the United States today. The crumbs left over can be delegated to threadbare charities. One needs to only reflect on the soup kitchens in the post 1929 Weimar Republic. The most popular ones were organized by the Nazi Party and funded by wealthy patrons. As a march towards a new order has a familiar historical meme. The new brown shirts are those who terrorize citizens for not wearing masks, for not being locked down in their pens, and for simply supporting a political candidate of choice. Even children who do not follow the oligarchic narrative are not spared. The Great Reset. Great pruning will inevitably occur in the mega billionaire club as whatever remains of the global corona economy is systematically cannibalized. The club will get smaller but wealthier and will attempt to destroy and sway our collective destiny. The control over education, healthcare, and the means of communications and basic social provisions is being increasingly ceded by governments to the global elite. Governments will colluding in the new normal will sooner or later face the ear of distressed masses. Politicians and assorted social justice warriors will be scapegoated once they have outlived their usefulness. And this cauldron, the century-old technocratic dream of replacing politicians, electoral processes, and businesses with societies run by scientists and technical experts, may emerge. Thanks to advances in panoptic technologies, it'll be an age for the rational science of production and scientific collectivism. The latter is eerily redolent of the Soviet Sharashka prison lab system. The production and supply of goods will be coordinated by a central directorate led not by elected representatives whose roles where they exist will be nominal anyway, but by technocrat factotums. Perhaps this is what the World Economic Forum refers to as the Great Reset. In reality, though, the idea smacks of a global Gosplan minus the Dr. sausages for the innumerable many. Some emerging economies like Malaysia and India casually refer to technocracy as an infusion of greater technical expertise into bureaucracy. This is a misinterpretation of technocracy's long-standing means and goals. One intractable problem remains: will the emerging global oligarchy tolerate the existence of various deep states worldwide? Initially, both groupings may cooperate to their mutual benefit, but their respective raisons d'etre are too contradictory to be reconciled. One thrives on an open society run by obedient hirelings who will administer a global ministry of truth, while other depends on secrecy and a degree of national sovereignty to justify its existence. Surveillance technologies ushered in by the ongoing corona psychosis may end up being the deciding factor in this struggle. After all, if social media posts by the President of the United States and the White House can be blatantly censored today, think of what the repercussions for billions of people worldwide tomorrow. And you know, in geopolitics, we're starting to see a lot of these themes click up together, right? We're starting to see a lot of the things that we were told about, like, let's say, Agenda 21, coming true today. Ticketmaster has announced that if you want to go to one of their concerts, you must take a coronavirus test and or prove that you have taken the vaccine. Michael, actually, you know about Dr. Fauci. You know, he's not an infectious disease doctor. He's a doctor of public health. And there's actually a book called Fauci, the Bernie Madoff of Science, and like the greatest fraud. Like, and so you should check that out on Amazon. I don't know if you know about that book or not, but it's an interesting book that they would coin Fauci as being basically the Bernie Madoff of science. And we all know what Bernie Madoff did, right? We had that Ponzi scheme, you know, took millions of dollars from people. And I believe it's still in jail, right? Bernie Madoff is probably still in jail. But what's interesting is that this summer, they brought up this Great Reset. And like I said, it's coming out of the World Economic Forum. And what's interesting about this is that they're using this into an opportunity for themselves. Okay. And here's some more interesting factoids that I thought I would keep you guys up to date with. So this summer, if people don't follow the World Economic Forum, it's a group of individuals who usually meet in Davos, Switzerland, once a year or so, but they came together in a special event to talk about these things. And the World Economic Forum, in my opinion, could be akin to Bilderberg as far as some of the secrecy, some of the players who are there, some of the topics that are talked about. And they just had a recent new one just a couple weeks ago that was like about green policies, like Green New Deal type shit. That was interesting. And how to enact it in the post COVID-19 world, right? So I was like, wait, hold up. They're planning for a post coronavirus world. What about the coronavirus world we're in now? Right? So King Abdullah bin Al Hussein of Jordan opened the World Economic Forum's Sustainable Development Impact Summit 2020 with a call for a great reset, urging drastic action to address problems laid bare by the exacerbated global COVID-19 pandemic. The crisis should be seen as an opportunity for all of us if we act decisively and act together, he said. We must begin by rethinking our entire global system to become more integrated, more resilient, and just. A globalized world cannot thrive by leaving its most vulnerable communities behind. We're all in this together, and the sooner we realize it, the better. The way forward must be rooted in a reglobalization that fortifies the building blocks of our international community by enabling countries to strike a balance between self-reliance and positive interdependence, enabling all us to jointly mark a holistic response to all crises facing our world. A new world order. A response that strengthens our global economy, but also addresses inequalities. A response that leads to technological and industrial progress, but also ensures the sustainability of our shared environment. In the summit's opening session, panelists drew attention to a wide range of issues that can and must be addressed as the world remakes itself in the wake of the pandemic. Disruptions to supply chains, including massive shortages of personal protective equipment and other medical supplies in the early months of the outbreak, highlighted not only the fragility of the intricate global systems dependent on unimpeded transport, but also the fact that existing supply chains were built for convenience and not human centered, said Grace Forrest, founding director of the Walk Free Foundation. Supply chains were built to be efficient, irrespective of the cost locally. She called for more locally focused and more transparent supply chains that center communities, commit to sustainability, and removing obstacles to the full and free participation of women and girls who make up over 70% of the victims of modern slavery. We need to be honest that we can't keep moving forward when so many people are being held back. Agricultural practices by the world's farmers cannot be changed through shifts in consumption alone, said Anushka Ratnake, founder and chief executive officer of My Agro. It's not a secret that farmers need tools to adapt outdated agricultural practice given climate change, and until now, most of that change has been pushed by the consumer. But to truly reset this, change needs to come and start from the farmers, and we can help support them and to do that by deeply listening. Ratnake warned of a looming food security crisis, and particularly in countries where governments have created restrictions on travel or closed weekly markets, which is the main way that farmers earn money. During the dry season, there was a lot of hesitance to spend money and make investments in their farms. So I think the next 6 to 12 months, food security is going to be our biggest crisis, maybe even ahead of COVID. Rebecca Masiak, Chief Executive Officer of TechSoup Global, stressed that technology can and must be a part of the solution, but that unequal access to technology has so far proved to be a big part of the problem, worsening societal divisions at a time when, due to the pandemic, reliance on digital connectivity has been markedly increased. Bill Gates has talked about the wide availability of digital technology that allows sharing information of global collaboration as being a critical factor in the speed of innovation, she noted, but digital technologies are simply not yet widely available to civil society at the grassroots level. We must invest the necessary infrastructure for innovation. We need to support civil society workers and their communities by making all they know available to each other, to governments, to business. That is the Great Reset is, in fact, a reset, improving both justice and opportunity for all. Elaine Benjani, Chief Executive Officer of Majid Al Futam Holding, said his company has seized on the pandemic to aggressively move forward on eliminating plastics from production and packaging, a move said that both customers and partner companies have quickly accepted. Ivan Duque, president of Colombia, noted that his country faced a number of crises this year, including massive inflow of refugees from neighboring Venezuela. Colombia has managed to meet the challenges and substantially and reopen its economy without ignoring environmental commitments. He said that Colombia has increased its intensive care unit capacity from 5,000 to over 10,000 beds and has kept deaths and contagions per million to levels lower than many countries of higher per capita income. In spite of this, Duke said, we have not left the green agenda behind, we have even accelerated it. Colombia has pledged to plant 180 million trees by August 2022 as a part of the World Economic Forum's Trillion Trees initiative and is on track to plant 50 million this year despite the pandemic. Duke also highlighted the way that executing state priorities can actually advance sustainability goals. He cited examples the efforts stamp out cocoa cultivation, noting that each hectare of cocoa planted results in the destruction of 3 hectares of tropical jungle, as well as illegal cattle ranching and timber harvesting. Duke also called for the creation of a credit market modeled on carbon credit markets and aimed at mobilizing global resources to protect the Amazon basin. I think the Great Reset leaves us with the message that we have to find more humane solutions. We have to acknowledge whether it's technology, whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's through government, we have to put the human being at the center, and the means the human being has to be more conscious about how to reduce the individual CO2 footprint. And at the same time, how they all can participate in building everlasting sustainable solutions. King Abdullah II captured the theme of the Sustainable Development Impact Summit when he exhorted participants, instead of looking at problems to solve, I urge you to look at opportunities to seize and ways to collaborate to rebuild a truly global inclusive system that leaves no one behind. You know, I'm not feeling that. And there's tons of articles that are similar like this, you guys, that are out there. And I mean a lot. They said COVID-19 and low oil prices push millions of Iraqis into poverty. How come we haven't heard that? How come we haven't heard Iraq folks are struggling? Is that maybe why Trump wants to get these folks out before Biden gets into office? Because if he removes soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, these folks ain't gonna riot over there because they ain't got nothing. Because they remember a time under Saddam Hussein where they had something, right? And then some people didn't have shit, right? But that's different. But some people didn't have anything, but some people did. They're not going to take well to times of famine again, in my opinion. I just don't. Now we're going to see what this says, but I don't feel that that's true. Twin shocks of COVID-19 pandemic and the collapse of oil prices have caused significant economic challenges and pushed millions of Iraqis into poverty, according to the new issue of the World Bank's Iraq Economic Monitor. The new fall 2020 edition of the Economic Monitor, entitled Protecting Vulnerable Iraqis in a Time of a Pandemic, the Case for Urgent Stimulus and Economic Reforms, finds that under a benign impact scenario, up to 5.5 million more Iraqis could fall into poverty due to twin crisis. Furthermore, the potential reduction of the public wage bill and pensions could push an additional 0.4 to 1.7 million Iraqis into poverty. So we're talking, like, at this point, we're talking 7 million more into poverty with these two groups, unless the right sizing exercise is introduced in a progressive and efficient fashion. The Economic Monitor estimates that Iraq's GDP is set to contract by 9.5% in 2020. 9.5%. You can't, as a country, withstand those type of losses. You just can't, unfortunately. We thought when our GDP was going to be plus 3%, it was going to be the best shit we ever saw. So just think what minus 9% is going to do to a country. While oil production plummeted to a 5-year low, Iraq's economy contracted by 6.8% during the first half of the year, of which non-oil GDP contracted by 9.2%, as lockdowns and other COVID-19 related containment measures affected services sectors. According to the report, the Iraqi government revenues fell by 47.5% in the first 8 months of 2020, while expenditures remain high as a result of the public wage bill and pensions. Such budget rigidities put pressure on government financing needs, which are expected to reach a staggering 25.8% of GDP by the end of 2020. Multiple security and economic crises in recent years have left unequal imprints across the region and groups in Iraq, yet the horizon on the country's economic outlook revolves around the global prospects of oil markets and the capacity of the healthcare sector to cope with the pandemic. Conscious of the situation, government approved in October 2020 a comprehensive policy and reform white paper which sets out a blueprint of reforms over the next 3 to 5 years that, if implemented, could mark a turning point for Iraq's economy. The white paper aims to rebalance the economy and put it back on track by enabling the state and taking necessary actions to create a dynamic and diversified economy. This in turn leads to the creation of jobs for citizens to have a decent living. The magnitude of economic challenges facing Iraq need a long-term solution and long overdue structural reforms, said Suraj Kumar Jha, World Bank Masharek Regional Director. The reforms outlined in the government's white paper, if implemented, will boost job creation, especially in the private sector, as well as economic growth, which are key to improving the livelihood of Iraqis. There are large economic gains to be made through the implementation of the long-awaited reforms. The World Bank simulates that such reforms could add as much as 58.4% to Iraq's per capita GDP growth. Now, y'all remember Deagle? Deagle.com? Y'all remember what countries were going to be doing better in GDP? Iraq was. And we all wondered how the hell that was going to happen, right? This right here is how it's going to happen, right there. So I just want to point that out. We all wondered how that was going to happen when we saw the Deagle.com, where it showed, all the countries and population decreased and all these things. We wondered how the hell is Iraq up on the top? This how Iraq's up on the top. Overall, the ultimate success of this reform initiative is dependent on the political will and the garnering of public support to lead Iraq out of the fragility trap that it's been grappling with for so long. The policy response requires working towards health and livelihood protection in the short term, including usage of tools like cash transfers, public works, or attractive labor market programs, but also addressing structural issues through a deeper reforms program. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, things are happening, y'all. I mean, they're talking about fuel will be all of a sudden carbon neutral flying. We've got all this Green New Deal crap. Literally all of it. I mean, truly all of it. Russia's going to build a naval facility in Sudan. That's interesting. You know, ooh, this is an interesting one. Custodians of Islam changing their avatar. That's interesting. I wonder what we can find out about that. Let's see. All right, let's find out. If we peek into the historical traces, it can be seen that the world has fought on more wars on religion than for their state's dignity and integrity than for any other reason. It's mainly because accepting each other's ideologies, either religious or national, it's hard to accept. And at this at the present, the prevailing issue if somebody looks deeper into the complex picture of geopolitics, which that does come into play. People don't realize that even in World War II, that countries such as Italy and Armenia worked together with the Muslims to get the Catholics hired the Muslims to fight for them, right, in World War II. And people don't realize that. So, the geopolitics, I would have never thought, oh, goodness. Okay, hold on. We're going to wait. I'm going to give it a second to catch up. Catch up. Come on, catch. I hope you guys are just going to wait for this for a second to come back in. I'm getting full service again. So we're just going to wait for this camera to come back in. These are the joys of living off grid. Just the joys of living off grid, you guys. It's a wonderful thing. There we go. Back. I don't want to mess with the camera too much, but I'm gonna leave it like that for a second so I can figure it out. Um, yeah, this is ridiculous. I don't know why this device wants to do that. Back to the article, everyone. The United Arab Emirates has passed new laws that have shocked the entire. Oh no, I was not there. Yeah, no, I was. Passed new laws that have shocked the entire Muslim world. The Arab world has also been perceived as the custodians of Islam, and other Muslim countries have to look towards. Here we go. Perfect. And other Muslim countries look towards the perfect implementation of misinterpreted Islamic values, ignoring the fact that mainly the values followed in the Arab world are Arabic, not Islamic. There is a huge difference among the two interpretations. The UAE has recently relaxed its social constraints, these constraints that served as a shield from adopting the un-Islamic practices and pro-Western values. The UAE has allowed couples to cohabit. It has allowed drinking without the fear of punishment. It lastly has also put off the honor crime from its menu, meaning they have criminalized the act of honor killing. The decision of the UAE to revamp its policies depict that the UAE has chosen a new avatar, a more pro-Western avatar, leaving the Islamic values behind. The broadening of personal freedoms reflects that the UAE is on a new journey to change its society at home. After the announcement of the new laws, it seems as if the United Arab Emirates is more focused on shifting their oil-dependent economy or other industries. This includes inviting the high flow of Israel and Western investments to their country at the cost of anything. They're aiming to boost UAE as the skyscraper tourist destination for Western tourists and fortune seekers, and businesses regard of its legal hardline Islamic system. Oh, dang. Yeah, I know. I tried not to read anything while it was skipping, so hopefully you guys didn't miss anything. I try to wait because I can notice when it goes out for me at least, and then I try to at least wait. I live in the middle of nowhere. I live in a travel trailer. I try to do the best I can. So I'm sorry, you guys, if the audio or the quality isn't good. I cannot get my router to pick up my devices tonight. Like I could probably go back up to the studio, but it's late here, and I was just, these are the things that kept Scarlet up at night, you guys. If you want to know what Scarlet's doing usually at this time of night, I'm sitting here like reading these and being like, mm, mm. That's how I feel, y'all. But we'll continue on. I digress. Moreover, the major revamps came particularly right after the historic U.S. brokered deal to normalize relations between the UAE and Israel. The future will reveal it, but it could be foreseen that the days of monarchy are coming to an end. It won't happen in a few years. It will take time, but it's surely going to happen. The decades-old, filthy rich monarchy will be replaced by democracy, for sure. Other than the UAE, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is also on the same journey. The new monarch, King Mohammed bin Salman, is tilted towards the Western culture and more liberalist thoughts and values. He is more inclined to bring on more liberal structures in their country. For examples, recently, Saudi Arabia has given more freedom to women for driving and is allowed to work with men at offices or any other workplaces. These drastic changes were considered an impossible task to do, but things are changing rapidly. The question is to act now, where would Pakistan tilt? Whose society would Pakistan look upon as the guardian in customs of Islam and its Islamic values? The Arab countries have also had a massive influence among Pakistani society, particularly in religious terms. Pakistan has to bear with the cost of Wahhabism clashing with Shiaism and other Islamic sects that were mainly brought to by the Arabs into this country. Many Pakistanis have considered the Arabs as their ideal and the Arabian society as an ideal society to live in. Now remember, Pakistan used to be Hindustan with India. Okay? So they were both Hindustan. And then within a war, I believe it was, Pakistan and India split up, having now the borders today in the Himalayas that they do now. And so they kind of despise each other. They call them Paks over there, and they kind of despise them because I watch a lot of Indian news, right? Indian news is interesting, y'all. Y'all want to see some people like fight with each other on air? Go to some Indian news. Sometimes you can't hear anyone saying anything because they're just all screaming at each other, but it's great because we would never be allowed to do that on American TV. I mean, they would just take you off, you know? So the fact that they let them grieve their differences, some of the insults I have heard have been great, okay? But anyway, I digress. I have also heard people giving examples of the Islamic system of Saudi Arabia, how loyal they are to Islamic values. They are also perceived as the guardians and custodians of Islamic values. But now, as they are inclined or totally moving towards the Western system, would Pakistan also opt for liberalism in their country? As there have always been an environment of confusion in the Pakistani society, this confusion whether to opt for democracy or go for an Islamic system. This has created a sharp separation in Pakistani society. The ones struggling to go totally Western, far left, and the others trying to preserve the Islamic system, far right. Which that's interesting. They consider that far left? That's interesting. Wow. Just because we would think far left and right are totally different things here. After United Arab Emirates' new laws, this question is becoming more complex. The transformation of the United Arab Emirates. Perfect. Okay, let me put this up for a second. Sorry, you guys. Brand, boom. Okay. Adoption of westernized values shows that it is only the Muslim world leaving its values behind and moving towards a borrowed baggage of cultures and values. The future will disclose that who will sit on the throne of the custodian of Islam. Till now, the changing geopolitical situation shows that it is Turkey that is striving to go for this throne. Right. That's what I'm saying, Migto. For real, though. You ain't lying, though, Migto. That's real. I'm with you. Because that's kind of what it sounds like, that they're all opening up. And then, like, they just posed the question, what is Pakistan doing? God, I just got hit in the head with a pillow. I'm glad I turned off the camera now. Holy crap, this hurts my ear. Let's see if you guys can still hear me. Hold on. I know that was probably loud for a second, but literally my ear's about to fall off. So it just makes you wonder, like I said, with them putting all the pressure on Pakistan and saying the other countries have basically, gone towards a more Western point of view, that just makes me question things, right? So they say, in the current politics of Arab powers, I would say, a tree's beauty lies in its branches, but its strength lies in its roots, rightly said by Matshana Dilwayo. And I just thought that was really interesting. Lots of things are happening right now. It's wild. I just don't even know what to say. Wow. So they even go as far to say that there's a political philosophy that they're using that can construct a post-Islamist political doctrine. And this is because Carlyle's conception of transcendentalism in Sartor Resartus, itself a philosophical and theological construct in the Platonic lineage that is the successor to Islam. Carlyle satirically conceptualized transcendentalism. In the 19th century, Sartor resorts. Oh, Resartus. Resartus, a work of fiction. F.A. Lee, reflecting on and arguing on behalf of the merits of Carlyle's forecast on the future during the midst of World War II, in his book Carlyle, Prophet of Today, calls Sartor Resartus the highest achievement of the Romantic movement of Europe. Romanticism is a nebulous construct, but it connotates European reaction to Enlightenment rationalism and empirical science by seeking to prioritize what it took to be beyond both the scope of rigid scientific positivism, positivism, and dogmatic theology and ideology such as intuition, nature, spirituality, and aesthetics. An analytical treatment of transcendentalism in the context of global political climate in 2020 demonstrates it can be applied in the context of political development as a cosmopolitan post-Islamism. By casting Carlyle's transcendentalism as cosmopolitan, I argue that it's a post-Islamism that belongs to all the world and is applicable to be at home all over the world. As such, Carlyle's transcendentalism is not a post-Islamism for the Middle East solely, but could initially be most applicable in the context of Islamic Middle Eastern countries. Subscribers to liberalism, communism, and Islamism promote each ideology as global and cosmopolitan. Boom. Boom. Right there. That just said it all. Liberalism, communism, and Islamism promote each ideology as global and cosmopolitan. It is the cool thing. It is the right thing. It is the just thing. It is the fair thing to do. Like Islam, Carlyle's transcendentalism is a philosophy theology that can be cast as a political doctrine to serve a political purpose. In Sartor Resartus, Carlyle offers a comprehensive philosophy that is simultaneously a moral, social, political philosophy in much the same fashion as how Islam has been converted into the political ideology of Islamism. Carlyle's transcendentalism is not a widely practiced philosophy and has not heretofore been recognized as a political doctrine. Carlyle's Sartor Resartus was a chief inspiration for the American transcendentalism as a 19th century intellectual and social movement led by perhaps most iconic American philosophers on the world stage, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Emerson and Thoreau were inspired by Hinduism and the Indian philosophy to elevate the mysticism of nature spirituality into a primary focal point of their attention. Like Islamism, transcendentalism has yet to be constructed as a coherent doctrine that is accepted universally by those who identify with these respective doctrines. For example, both Islamism and transcendentalism are much less theoretically dogmatic than Marxism as a political doctrine. Carlyle describes the tenets of a philosophy of close, a term synonymous with transcendentalism, through the voice of Professor Diogenes Tefeldstruck. Ooh, that was hard, y'all. Protagonist in the Sartor Resartus. Whoever sensibly exists, whatsoever represents spirit to spirit, is properly a clothing, a suit of raiment, put on for the season to be laid off. Thus, in this one pregnant subject of clothes, rightly understood, is included that all men have been thought, dreamt, done, and been. The whole external universe and what it holds is but clothing. The essence of all science lies in the philosophy of clothes. Carlyle's philosophy of clothes culminates in attaining transcendentalism. Carlyle defines transcendentalism succinctly as the view that matter is spirit, and such is the manifestation of spirit. In other words, transcendentalism views the entirety of the universe and all that comprises in it is enchanted with spiritual divinity rather than entirely bereft of spiritual divinity. Excuse me. As such, transcendentalism is a minimalist and nominal theological dogma that offers no theological narrative beyond such a simple theism. Hold on. I don't think I have good service. Okay, there we go. I was waiting for a second because I noticed that I dropped a little bit of service and I really need something. guys hear me all right? Just before I continue, because I don't want anybody to miss that. Wait one more second. Breathe. There we go. Let me try to step back from it for a second. That way I can get you guys to be able to hear again. All right. Sucks these service problems. Let me know if you guys bring up the cam and I can see myself. That means I have we were at almost done. Scarlet defines transcendentalism as the universe it divine order. This is universe and thus okay, there we go. Got it back. Oh, come on, Signal. This is struggling, you guys. Okay, that should be good. I've just never seen it go like so low on this device, at least. Okay, so he says Carlyle thus defines that transcendentalism as the view that all is material and immaterial in the entirety of the universe, and thus in the entirety of human history, is ephemeral and cannot be accounted for without considering it as symbolic of a divine spiritual order. Carlyle concludes that all science seeks to account for what comprises the universe, and thus transcendentalism rests at the apex of all scientific deliberations. The role of a transcendentalist is to ponder the universe in its entirety as a manifestation of spirit. Transcendentalism is relevant to politics as a prospective political doctrine that offers a mean to achieve consensus and yield social solidarity in the context of local and national political communities and in the context of a global political community. Carlyle derives conceptions of social solidarity and renunciation of antagonism and economic consumption as corollaries of his conception of transcendentalism. At this juncture, it should be acknowledged that the New Age and counterculture that defined much of the West and the world in the 1960s and 70s was an unconscious, incoherent, and non-mainstream reincarnation of American transcendentalism and descendant of American transcendentalism. The elements of the New Age and the counterculture, non-dogmatic spirituality, social solidarity, renunciation of economic consumption were coherently constructed and deemed a superior philosophy relative to dogmatic theology and dogmatic materialism, aka capitalism and communism, by Thomas Carlyle, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau as modern Platonic philosophers. Carlyle frames transcendentalism in another manner by asking through the voice of Feldstrack, what is nature? Ha! Why do I not name thee God? Art thou not the living garment of God? Art thou not the living garment of God? O heavens, is it in very deed he then that ever speaks through thee, that lives and loves in thee, that lives and loves in me? It is this context that Carlyle is transcendental in concluding that all matter embodies divine spirit. It is on this basis that Carlyle delivers perhaps the climactic thesis of the Sartor Resartus, which is also Sistink's definition of what he coins the everlasting yeah, and concept that informs transcendentalism. The universe is not dead and demoniacal, a charnel house with specters, but godlike and my father's. Upon attaining this perspective, Feldstrack reflects his social application and his implications to achieve social solidarity. With other eyes too, I could now look upon my fellow man with an infinite love and an infinite pity. Poor, wandering, wayward man, art thou not tired and beaten with stripes, even as I am? Ever wert thou bear the royal mantle or the beggar's gabardine, art thou not so weary, so heavy laden? And thy bed of rest is but a grave. O brother, my brother, why cannot I shelter thee in my bosom and wipe away all the tears from my eyes? Truly, the din of many voiced life within the solitude, the mind's organ. I could hear was no longer a maddening discord, but a melting one, like inarticulate cries, which in the ear of heaven are like prayers. The poor earth, with her poor joys, was now my needy mother, not my cruel stepdame. Man, with his so mad wants and so mean endeavors, had become the dearer to me. And even for his sufferings and his sins, I now first named him brother. The non-dogmatic, i.e. non-Christian or Islamic, but simultaneously post-Christian, post-Islamic, and post-dogmatic view of humanity as an embodiment of spiritual divinity yields the legitimacy and validity of social solidarity and the corresponding renunciation of antagonism. Carlyle theorizes that the primacy of human spiritual interest relative to and as a function of the insatiability of human material appetites. In this context, renunciation can be defended and legitimized as rational through Trefelsdrach philosophical construction. Man's unhappiness, as I construe, comes of his greatness, because there is an infinite in him. With all his cunning, he cannot quite bury under the finite. Will the whole finance ministers and upholsters of confectioners of modern Europe undertake, in joint stock company, to make one shoeblack happy? They cannot accomplish it above an hour or two, for the shoeblack has a soul quite other than his stomach, and would require, if you consider it, for his permanent satisfaction and saturation, simply this allotment, no more and no less. God's infinite universe altogether to himself, therein to enjoy infinitely, and fill every wish as fast as its rose. So true is it, what then I said, that the fraction of life can be increased in the value, not so much by increasing your numerator as by lessening your denominator. Nay, unless my algebra deceive me, unity itself divided by zero will give infinity. Make thy claim of a wages zero, then thou hast the world under thy feet. Well, did the wisest of our time write, it is only with renunciation that life, properly speaking, can be said to begin. Essentially, without pursuing renunciation and humanity at the level of the collective and at the level of the individual, is neither consciously or unconsciously pursuing the satisfaction of an insatiable appetite for materialist consumption. Renunciation of materialist consumption is thus the only means for humanity at the level of the collective and of the individual not to be dissatisfied, and makes primary humanity's non-materialist spirituality. The conclusion that can be drawn from this is humanity needs to achieve a decent material standard of living that crosses a minimal threshold, and then renounce any additional materialist consumption, which is bound to entail the pursuit of infinite consumption. The current unprecedented and unsustainable nature of increasing consumer and national debt in the context of the United States provides an exemplary lens to view Carlyle's conception of renunciation. An inference that can be drawn from the Sartor Resartus is that humanity must attain the everlasting yea at the level of the individual, so that the social solidarity that can then be yielded at the collective level. And a corollary inference could be made that human conflict in its forms will persist and replicate itself indefinitely under every individual until every individual reaches the everlasting yea. Essentially, one must consciously come to the conclusion that not only oneself is the embodiment of divine spirit, but all of one's fellows embody divine spirit in the same non-dogmatic sense, so as to renounce antagonism and achieve social solidarity. Dogmatic theologies, by contrast, facilitate disunity and conflict about their incommensurable theological doctrines. Conflict, more generally, takes place because the antagonistic parties are unconscious of the notion that their disparate and highly dogmatic ideologies and theologies are individually and collectively dream theorems. Dream theorems. Look, y'all. Such a realization would unify them, ostensibly becoming transcendentalists. Carlyle asked through the voice of Teufelsdrockh, "What are all your national wars with their Moscow retreats and sanguinary hate-filled revolutions but the somnambulism of uneasy sleepers?" Carlyle implies that those who are sleeping to dream theorems, i.e., ideologies and theologies themselves not transcendentalism, and thus not awake to transcendentalism, engage in wars and revolutions as a form of sleepwalking to their dream theorems. Such wars and revolutions take place as a function of humanity collectively being unawake and not subscribing to transcendentalism. Carlyle's discussion of being unawake to transcendentalism is analogous to Plato's allegory of the cave in the sense that non-transcendentalists are akin to those in the cave who think the shadows on the wall are the truth. By analogy, non-transcendentalists are akin to those in the cave who think the shadows on the wall are truth. By analogy, non-transcendentalists believe that their dogmatic ideologies and or theologies are truth when, from the vantage point of transcendentalism, they are arbitrary, mutually incommensurable, and thus fodder for mutually interminable conflict. The inference can then be made that Carlyle offers a gateway for humanity to achieve mutual accord rather than discord if hypothetically humanity were to universally attain this everlasting yea. This is because the everlasting yea provides a communitarian model to attain communal existence through the transcendental rather than through the diverse material attributes such as race, economic class, incommensurable dogmatic theological traditions, etc. Carlyle's transcendentalism embodies a rationale for collective renunciation rather than collective antagonism. The exposition of Carlyle's transcendentalism and his derivative philosophical conclusions with respect to renunciation and social solidarity provides a foundation for the political application of transcendentalism as a prospective political doctrine. Transcendentalism's relevance to politics is that its consideration of prospective hegemony as an ideology itself provides prospective telos for a populace to attain, a telos that has been hidden and gone unrecognized in the analysis of the Sartre Restartus and the history of political thought. Universal popular consciousness and universal spiritual divinity with the absence of dogma could potentially facilitate renunciation and social solidarity popularly in the same manner it did to Feldstrack personally. The perspective of the phenomenon of transcendentalism's political application could hypothetically connotate a new stage of human political development. Carlyle's transcendentalism supplies a coherent doctrine that could be potentially instrumental in achieving a material or political end. Transcendentalism is not an anti-ideology in that it does not seek to proselytize converts to a strict dogma and is immaterial on economic matters, and that it promotes renunciation, look, rather than insatiable economic consumption. Carlyle makes known that through the voice of the narrator that wild as it looks, this philosophy of close, can we ever reach its real meaning, promises to reveal new coming eras, first dim rudiments, already budding gems of a nobler era in universal history. Transcendentalism can be a caste successor theology to Islam and Islamism because Carlyle and American transcendentalism is recognized as post-Christian. And Carlyle, Emerson, and Thoreau themselves consciously identified as post-Christian. As Islam was an evolution from Christianity to subsequent Christianity's inauguration, transcendentalism was an evolution from both Christianity and Islam to subsequent to Islam's inauguration. Like Islam's inherent recognition of the inadequacy of Christianity, transcendentalism was incarnated with the inherent view that the Christian and Islamic theological traditions needed to be built upon and could be preserved as a function of being retailored with an innovation. Transcendentalism is an evolution from Christianity, and Islam embodies much of a different standing than a rejection of Christianity and Islam. Carlyle both praises and critiques Christianity and Islam and provides an argument in defense of transcendentalism as a doctrine on a higher plane. Such praise of Christianity and Islam, along recognizing their inadequacies, is literally not a popular track to take, and leaves nearly the entire universe of the public uncomfortable that transcendentalism is inherently a third way to dogmatic theological tradition on the one hand and secular atheism on the other. Transcendentalism, by leaving Christians, Muslims, and adherents to all other dogmatic theologies and agnostics and atheists uneasy, can be perceived as a type of Hegelian synthesis of theological dogmatism and atheism. As a synthesis, it too embodies a type of hybrid moderation between the polar and comparatively extreme positions of theological dogmatism on the one end, and the dogmatic faith and atheism on the other end. This is another lens to be able to cast and construct transcendentalism as a type of cosmopolitan consensus in the context of global religiosity. Carlyle is perhaps the most recognizable and perhaps most ardent European Islamophile in modern European intellectual history. He lectured publicly and courageously on Muhammad and not Christ as the embodiment of hero as prophet before a London audience in the heart of Christendom in 1840 and published his lecture on hero worship, and the heroic in history. Although not himself a Muslim, Carlyle's praise of Muhammad on multiple occasions makes it possible that the inference that Carlyle's transcendentalism can be cast and situated as an evolutionary development within the context of the Islamic tradition. Carlyle's affinity towards Islam demonstrates a consensus between himself and Islam with respect to valuing the spiritual and divine over the material, earthly, and utilitarian. For example, Carlyle chastises Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism by drawing on Muhammad on hero worship and the heroic in history. Benthami unity, virtue by profit and loss, in reducing this God's world to a dead brute steam engine, the infinite celestial soul of man to a kind of hay balance for weighing hays and thistles on, pleasures and pains on, if you ask me, which gives Muhammad or they beggarlier and falser view of man and his destinies in this universe. I will answer, it is not Muhammad. According to Carlyle, the advance to very different epoch of religion from paganism to Islam is a great change, and Carlyle remarks what a change and progress is indicated here. When the universal condition and thoughts of men, casting Islam as a change and progress inherently casted as a milestone in the continuous evolution of how humanity theorizes with respect to the divine. In the context of this continuous theological evolution from paganism to Christianity to Islam, Carlyle characterizes Muhammad perhaps coyly, by no means the truest of prophets, but I do esteem him a true one. In Sartor Resartus, Teufelsdrock defines theology, in which the church calls church clothes, as the forms, the vestures under which men at previous times of the world, various periods embodies and represented for themselves the religious principle, that is to say, invested in the divine idea of the world with a sensible and practically active body, so that it might dwell among them as a living and life-giving word. Such a characterization underscores Carlyle's conception of the variability, evolution, and perhaps a level of arbitrariness in dogmatic theologies that naturally occurs in the context of history. The juxtaposition of Sayyid Qutb's milestones with Carlyle's Sartor Resartus is valuable in illustrating the prospective political application that can be made of Carlyle's transcendentalism. Qutb can be cast as a type of default representative of Islamism, as there is no official representative of Islamism. But Islamism can be defined as the pluralistic movement to revise Islam's political application as a doctrine for governance in the 21st century since the end of the Caliphate in Constantinople in 1924. The political tactics associated with Islamism are diverse, ranging from grassroots political organizing in the context of political parties and electoral politics, all the way to violent terrorism associated with terrorist groups. President Erdogan's recent reversion of the Hagia Sophia to an Islamic religious institution can be perceived as mildly Islamist policy compared to the violent extremism of groups such as the Taliban or ISIS. The Qutb's milestones, perhaps the most influential source of modern Islamic political theory and a chief intellectual inspiration for Islamism. The book's influence on Islamism can be analogized to the influence of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto on communism. In other words, milestone is a call to action to implement Islamism as the sole hegemonic political doctrine and cease to provide an intellectual defense of the supremacy of Islamism. The Qutb is considered a spiritual and intellectual father of Islamism in general and the radical Islamist group, Al-Qaeda, in particular. And an analytical and literal interpretation of the Qutb leaves an opening to consider the possibility of evolution of Islamism into transcendentalism. Qutb cryptically calls on the establishment of Islamic society on the basis of a movement that takes the form of an evolutionary system. Islam's preservation in transcendentalism and transcendentalism's capacity to be a universal, cosmopolitan, and non-dogmatic doctrine to achieve consensus in the recognition of the divine order alongside of its commitments to renunciation of economic, racial, and national antagonisms demonstrates a theoretical pathway in which Islamism could evolve and embrace transcendentalism as a new stage of political development. After all, its unyielding and devotion to Islam as a singular, particularistic, ossified, and branded theological dogmatism on the part of Islamists prevents the realization of what may be called the spirit of Islamic society. Moreover, the realization of the spirit of Islamism is prevented from taking place, given that Islamists themselves adhere to plural, particularistic versions of Islam and themselves cannot agree to respect to the theology of Islam. Carlyle's conception of religion is profound tension with Khatib's commitment to Islam as the only valid religion. Khatib's adamant that Islam is the final doctrine to serve all humanity's needs, both at the level of the individual and the collective, and is the only viable totalizing doctrine to guide both humanity in the public and private spheres. He thus offers a basis to why we should reverse course from being engulfed in Jaliyah, a state in which God's laws are rejected, to embrace Islam for every need in personal and societal life. The Jaliyah is a term taken from the Quran, is usually translated as the age of ignorance, in reference to the pre-Islamic era on the Arabian Peninsula. According to the Kutub, the Jaliyah is its modern incarnation, owes existence to the putrid element of the lordship of man over man, in which separates man from the all-embracing system of the universe. The Kutub writes that extermination of the Jaliyah has been humanity's grand project, and the modern Jaliyah has been the condition of humanity's existence since the dawn of civilization in both pre-Islamic and post-Islamic eras. Elementally, the Jaliyah is a hegemonic social order that has persisted unchanged throughout entirety of human history. All hegemonic non-Islamic political systems, ranging from democracy to aristocracy to communism, can be cast as Jaliyah, as they perpetrate the rule of man over man and thus humanity's oppression at the hands of humanity. The Kutub theorizes on the prospects of a compromise with the Jaliyah. Islam does not accept any halfway compromise with the Jaliyah, whether it's the question of its concepts and ideology or laws of life based on this concept. Either Islam shall exist or Jaliyah. No third course is acceptable or agreeable to Islam in which the Jaliyah and Islam share equally. Islam's point of view in this regard is quite clear and bright. It says the truth is a unit which cannot be analyzed. If there will be no truth, it shall be false. If there it shall be falsehood. Mutual intermixing and intermingling of truth and falsehood and their coexistence is impossible. Either the command of Allah will prevail or that of the Jaliyah. Either the divine code will operate or the desire of self will rule. The Kutub describes the dynamics of the relationship between Islam and the Jaliyah. There's a wide yawning valley between Islam and Jaliyah, which cannot be bridged for the purpose that both should be able to meet midway. If all a bridge could be built for the purpose of the folk that the Jaliyah should cross over and take refuge in the lap of Islam, whether they are so-called Islam professing or residents of an Islamic country or those residing out of it. The Kutub defines religion as a system and way of life in which brings under its fold human life with all its details. The Kutub contends that the problem religion confronts is to banish all the fabricated gods throughout the establishment of the rule of God Most High. Kutub could it be inferred that vindicates Carlyle's transcendentalism with his claim that all previous theological conceptions of God were fabricated, while not suggesting precisely the rationale by why he thinks all their gods were fabricated, yet in the Islamic God is exception to the rule. Islam itself is a refabrication and evolution from Judaism and Christianity and is premised on the failure of these religions. Yet Kutub calls on fabricated gods to be banished and labels all Jewish and Christian societies as Jahili societies. Such a contradiction can be resolved by subscribing to Carlyle's transcendentalism and non-dogmatic and non-particularistic theism that can be positioned as post-Islamism. Carlyle's transcendentalism can be theorized and constructed as embodying and preserving Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in a non-denominational and non-dogmatic modern theism. Don't this sound like the one world religion, y'all? I'm just, we done been reading this for a while, and I'd just like to say that, and we about 3/4 of the way through, we got a little bit more. But doesn't this sound like the new world religion? Doesn't this sound like what everybody's been telling us? Doesn't this sound like, oh, what we know is bad and what we know is better and you suck? That's what it sounds like to me, y'all. That's all. Transcendentalism is the opposite of atheism in that purely theism without the theology. It is a construct that can be applied to achieve a ideal social order. Just as Marxism is dogmatic atheist materialism and Islamism is dogmatic political theology, transcendentalism is a non-dogmatic philosophical theological construct. The application of an analytical and political lens to transcendentalism allows one to consider how the political and social orders on any scale, from a local community to the global community, could change if a simple and non-dogmatic theism reigned hegemonic. Carlyle's transcendentalism shows itself to embody what Kutub sought to argue is embodied by Islam, namely that Islam is different in the respect of its nature and reality from all concepts which have been rampant in the world so far. According to Kutub, humanity must achieve a perfect harmony with nature of the universe, and such a harmony would naturally connote the end of human political development. While man evolves an atmosphere of coordination and uniformity with nature, it results in the establishment of a state of concordance between the mutual relationship of man and the general struggle of life. For when a man adopts an attitude of cooperation with nature, it consequently follows in the birth of complete agreement between human life and the universe, and only one system prevails in the human life and the universe. Thus, the collective side of man's life becomes free from mutual class and discord, and mankind is benefited with total goodness. Thereafter, various mysteries of the universe do not remain secret anymore. Man becomes a knower of nature's secrets. Hidden powers of the universe become apparent to him, and he gets the trace of hidden treasures in the spacious universe. He harnesses all of those powers and treasures in the direction of God's laws for total well being and prosperity of mankind, leaving no room for any clash or conflict between the man and nature. Otherwise, there is a constant struggle between them, and the desires and carnal passions are raising their head against the divine code. Qutb prescribes the ideal society as being society, not in condition with some are driven by greed, while others are burning with envy, that all of the affairs of the society are decided by the baton and sword, by threat, duress, and violence, that the hearts of the population are desolate while their spirits are broken, as is happening under the systems which are based on the authority of others than Allah's. For Qutb, Islamic society suppresses all the frivolous prejudices and weak associations of race, color, language, country, material considerations, and geographical boundaries. According to the Qutb, communism claimed to demolish all the walls which were raised by color, race, nation, country, and geography. But the foundations of this society were also not erected on the all-embracing base of human friendship, rather class conflict, which has made the basis of this society. Viewing from this angle, the communist society is another facet of the ancient Roman society. While the Roman society conferred the distinction on the nobility, the communist society imparts this status to the proletariat, and the underlying emotion is a feeling of hatred, malice, and envy. Such a degraded and malicious society cannot bear any other fruit except exciting the base human feelings. Carlo concludes in a manner largely synonymous with Sayyid Qutb's 20th century advocacy of Islamism. For only in looking heavenward, take it in what sense you may, not looking earthward, does what we can call union, mutual love, society begin to be possible. Carlyle describes the teaching of Islam and how Islam's core philosophical precepts are shared by Christianity and thus not exclusive to a particularistic and ecclesiastical theological tradition, but also offer a universal, non-dogmatic, and non-branded application to philosophy and theology writ large. God made us at first, sustains us yet, and all things are but a shadow of him, a transitory garment veiling the eternal splendor. Allah Akbar, God is great, and then also Islam, that we must submit to God, that our whole strength lies with the rein submission to him, whatsoever he do to us for this world and for the other. The thing he sends to us, were it be death, and be worse than death, shall be good, shall be best. We resign ourselves to God. If this be Islam, says Gothi, do we not all live in Islam? Yes, all of us that have a moral life, we all live. So I say, yet the one only true morality known. Man is right and invincible, virtuous, and on the road towards sure conquest, precisely while he joins himself to the deep law of the world, in spite of all superficial laws, temporary appearances, profit and loss calculations. He is victorious while he cooperates with that great central law, not victorious otherwise. And surely his first chance of cooperating with it, or getting into the course of it, is to know with his whole soul that is good and alone good. This is the soul of Islam. It's properly the soul of Christianity, for Islam is definable as a confused form of Christianity. Had Christianity not been, neither had it been. Christianity also commands us, before all, to be resigned to God. Carlyle, in his lecture on Muhammad, remarks that Islam means in its way denial of self, annihilation of self, and yet this is the highest wisdom that heaven has revealed to our earth. And the Sartor Resartus, Carlyle similarly comments that the annihilation of self is the first preliminary moral act to attaining the everlasting yea, which he casts as the highest philosophical perspective. Carlyle, in discussing Muhammad's inspiration for the concept of annihilation of self, de-emphasizes the importance of Islam's theological narrative and underscores Islam as a contribution to philosophy. Muhammad called it revelation, and the angel Gabriel. Who of us yet can know what to call it? Is it the inspiration of the Almighty that give us the understanding to know, to get into the truth of anything? Is it ever a mystic act for which the best logics can babble on the surface? In this quote, Carlyle sounds as if synonymous with Plato in his endorsement of the concept of intellectual and mystical intuition as a means of retrieving and realizing Platonic forms on Earth. Carlyle too theorizes what he takes to be the inadequacy of Christianity when he writes as a question to Fellstrock would hypothetically pose to Voltaire. Sufficiently hast thou demonstrated this proposition, considerable or otherwise, that the mythos of the Christian religion looks not into the 18th century as it did in the 8th, but what next? Wilt thou help us to embody the divine spirit of that religion in a new mythos, in a new vehicle and vesture, so that our souls, otherwise to perishing, may live? What? Thou hast no faculty in that kind. The interference can be made while synthesizing Carlyle's commentary with Christianity and Islam, with Carlyle's conceptualism of transcendentalism in the Sartor Resartus, that transcendentalism as a post-Christian and post-Islamic philosophy and theology has a compatibility with Christianity and Islam as a legitimate successor in their lineage. Boom! There goes the dynamite right there. Essentially, Christianity and Islam can be viewed as milestones on the road to the incarnation of transcendentalism and as a non-dogmatic and non-particularistic account of spiritual divinity. As such, the interference can also be made that Carlyle's semi-endorsements of Christianity and Islam implies their preservation and embodiment in transcendentalism. An inference from this as a function of such compatibility among transcendentalism, Islam, Christianity, Muslims, and Christians can retain their theological beliefs in Islam and Christianity as creeds, while also mutually adopting transcendentalism as a type of theological philosophical consensus. Such a consensus would embody a means of being simultaneously retain one's theological beliefs while avoiding hostile antagonism towards the others that subscribe to disparate theological beliefs. On a larger scale, transcendentalism would provide the means to attain such ascensions among the adherents to the universe of a non-transcendentalist ideologies and theologies that are incommensurable and thus naturally antagonistic towards one another. For example, in the Indian case, the religious conflict between Hinduism and Islam provides context for the prospective application and inauguration of transcendentalism as a means to attain conflict resolution. John Rawls said about theorizing a perspective of overlapping consensus to ensure the stability of liberalism, since he articulated the problem of liberalism as follows. How is it possible that there may exist over time a stable and just society of free and equal citizens, profoundly divided by reasonable though incompatible religions, philosophical and moral doctrines? Carlyle's transcendentalism offers such a prospective consensus, but on the larger scale, beyond merely the scope of liberalism in the context of a nation state. Transcendentalism also potentially can foster consensus among nation states in the context of international relations by embodying a simultaneously post-ideological and non-nationalist doctrine. Just as Islam has been appropriated for political purposes by Islamism, transcendentalism can be cast as a political doctrine to achieve what Islamism could not. Islamism could not achieve in its aims to unite humanity in submission to the divine as a means to resolve economic, racial, and nationalist conflict and all forms of conflict, because Islam is a dogmatic and particularistic theology that is mired in interminable conflict with competing dogmatic and particularistic theologies. Since Islam is in competition on the plane of dogmatic and particularistic theologies, such competition is incommensurable. There's no empirical means to establish the superiority of Christianity or Islam or any other dogmatic and particularistic theologies over the counterparts of the realm of theology. As a function of this, there's no philosophical means to establish the superiority of Islam in the realm a political ideology that includes liberalism, Marxism, and fascism, which has necessarily resulted in jihad being the primary mechanism to establish Islamism as a hegemonic doctrine for governance. In conclusion, Alasdair MacIntyre's conceptualization of incommensurability forms Islamism's status as being incapable of establishing its hegemony through mechanisms other than jihad. In After Virtue, MacIntyre asserts that in the context of liberalism, it's impossible to achieve consensus of any form because political agreements are incommensurable and thus indeterminable. MacIntyre conceives that incommensurability as taking place when a divergent arguments with respect to political, philosophical, and or moral problem are logically valid, and the conclusions follow from the premises. Yet the rival premises are such that we possess no rational way of weighing the claims against one another. MacIntyre theorizes on the bleak nature of contemporary moral and political debates. Moral philosophy. Moral philosophy, as dominantly understood, reflects the debates and disagreements of the culture so faithfully that its controversies turns out to be unsettlable in the way that political and moral debates themselves are. It follows that our society cannot hope to achieve moral consensus. Transcendentalism as a non-dogmatic and non-particularistic doctrine has the means to achieve the aims of Islamism, namely universal world peace. Carlyle's conception of transcendentalism was informed and influenced by Kant and Hegel and could be a fulfillment of their mutually antagonistic doctrines. In the context of Hegel, Carlyle's transcendentalism was conceptualized in Sartor Resartus, ironically, largely as a satirical parody and refutation of Hegelian philosophy. That Carlyle's conception of transcendentalism itself could represent the synthesis of Hegelian dialectics to achieve the end of history, in a political climate favorable to its inauguration as a practical ideology almost 2 centuries after the publication of the Sartor Resartus, should definitely be entertained. Transcendentalism has a favorable climate because we've witnessed the dissolution of Marxism with the exception of China and a few other states, and fascism, leaving liberalism and Islamism as the remaining hegemonic ideologies. Liberalism is vulnerable to the dissolution as a function of the COVID-19 pandemic, dissolving the liberal dream of the pursuit of the insatiable economic consumption as the end of history, and the concurrent increasingly transgressive, i.e., violent political contention in Europe and the United States with no long-term liberal resolution on the horizon. Carlyle's transcendentalism could be a vehicle to secure Kant's theory of global perpetual peace by concurrently taking up the mantle of post-liberalism and post-Islamism. The recognition of transcendentalism as such would only leave atheism or nihilism as a competitor doctrine. The elevation of hegemony of atheism and nihilism promises only an elevation of perpetual discord in the context of every individual going down Nietzsche's path of becoming an Übermensch and seeking to dominate all individuals in the absence of any shared social doctrine. With the decline of Platonism and Christianity and religiosity generally in the West, we have in fact been witnessing an atheist materialism wreak havoc in the form of Marxism on the left and fascism on the right as partners engage in mutual self-cancellation. The elements that date back from the 20th century have increasingly reemerged in Europe and in the United States, and in the 21st century under guises such as anti-fascism and populism are bound only lead to a similar conflagration as World War II. Thoreau equated Carlyle with Muhammad as a means of underscoring what he took to the magnitude of Carlyle's influence. Carlyle has the earnestness of a prophet. In an age of pedantry and dilettantism, he has no grain of these in his composition. There is nowhere else, surely, in readable English or other books, such direct and effectual teaching, reproving, encouraging, stimulating, and earnestly, vehemently, almost like Muhammad, like Luther. Emerson comments with respect to Carlyle, he is a man of the world. He does not belong to this state or country, but by his broad genius and talent of satire, which he throws about him, he is cosmopolitan, and his aims are as good as he can be. That Carlyle wrote the Sartor Resartus as a work of satirical fiction and a parody of Hegel's historicism should not prevent an analytical treatment of the Sartor Resartus. Carlyle's cryptic verbosity, hyperbole, and satirical tone in the Sartor Resartus has blinded readers from acknowledging the practical applications of Carlyle's philosophical conclusions. To put it as a metaphor, the Sartor Resartus is perceived as another bookcase, when in actuality it's a magic bookcase that embodies and conceals a passageway towards transcendentalism as a new doctrine. Transcendentalism can be constructed as a viable political doctrine as a function of being situated in the context of other doctrines. By doing such, the vulnerabilities of other doctrines can be seen through the lens of transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is an alternative to all other ideologies and theologies, which are necessarily and inherently dogmatic, particularistic, and mutually incommensurable, since they are themselves not transcendentalism. Carlyle chastises dogma when he writes, with your philosophical systems is other than a dream theorem, a net quotient, a confidently given out where divisor and dividend are both unknown. Such dogmatic, ideological, and or theological dream theorems would not be so bad if they didn't serve as fodder for the non-violent and violent conflict between needlessly antagonized parties. Wars and revolutions continuously replicate because the world is unawake and unconscious of transcendentalism and the means to put them to an end. Ostensibly, dogma will fight dogma, identity will fight identity, nation will fight nation, and scarce resources will be antagonized and over until there's a universal acceptance of transcendentalism as an anti-dogma and acceptance of renunciation as a rational social virtue that is a corollary and derivative of transcendentalism. Analogy of Plato's allegory of the cave is valuable in this context, because the philosopher descending back into the cave to bring wisdom to the cave dwellers is analogous to the transcendentalists informing the uneasy steps of their somnambulism. As Plato wrote in the Republic, you must go down, then, each in his turn, to live with the rest, and let your eyes grow accustomed to the darkness. You will then see 1,000 times better than those who live there always. You will recognize every image for what it is, and you know what it represents because you have seen justice, beauty, and goodness in their reality. And so we shall find life in our commonwealth to no mere dream, as it exists in most existing states, where men live fighting one another about shadows and quarreling for power, as if that were a great prize. Whereas in truth, government can be at its best and free from dissension only where the destined rulers are least desirous of holding office. Carlyle himself never promoted transcendentalism, likely because economic, political, and social climates would not even have facilitated a contemplation of transcendentalism as a viable hegemonic doctrine for governance in the context what was then only the advent of hegemony in the industrial liberal capitalism in partnership with the long-standing and still potent hegemony of Christianity. They say that Carlyle prophesizes that transcendentalism become a new viable doctrine in the future because transcendentalism is precisely the new vesture that Trefelsdrock, loom treadles, and such a vesture would inaugurate a golden age. Isn't that interesting? Because to some degree, it really makes you think. Because to some degree, yeah, if we could put all our bullshit aside and be like, you know what, you are me, I am we, namaste, basically, like the divine in you represents the divine in me, and like nobody's out to like actually gain power and like rule over each other, like that could in context work. But as he says in the satirical sense, if they're unwoke to what's going on, they're just going to be walking around not able to do anything. But on the same hand, it makes you think one world religion, because what's the one way you could get everybody to come together is if you use this transcendentalism as a way of saying, well, this is how we can get along, this is how we can work together, this is how, but it makes sense how globalization but gave such a platform for this, and it broke it down so beautifully, and this is how they're using it against us. And we've been saying that liberalism and Islam were in the same camp, and people are like, no, 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 it's not. But it is. That's the point of the day. It is connected because they go on these same concepts and theories. But that was a really interesting philosophical argument that was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. They should put read times on these. But I thought it was really good of pointing out where things could be an issue, where we have moved into this new idea, right? Because it was a work of fiction, right? And so that's the one thing, is that this was a work of fiction. The Sartor Resartus, and that's Sartorresartus. And it was a work of fiction by F.A. Lee. So I thought that was interesting. And that's by Carlyle. So, I mean, it's just really interesting. Because I think that's the way we're going. If anybody wanted to know how the one world religion comes into play, that's how the one world religion comes into play right there. Let me know what you guys think about that. I hope that I wasn't skipping this whole time. I hope that we weren't having issues. I hope that things were working well. This Well, that's beyond the point. Not really needed when I'm not utilizing the camera, when I have such little service anyway. I'm literally like hobbling. I cannot walk. My foot literally fell asleep. That was such an awkward position. I was in. All right. And the important reason why I brought this up, the important reason why I bring this up about how the Middle East might be heating back up with activity. We're pulling troops out of that area. And you and I have not checked on the geopolitical status of things in a while. And I thought that it was important to really think about that while I had time to go through these ideas with you guys, to really think about where we're going. Because, it's hard to focus geopolitically when everything's COVID, 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 election, 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 Trump, 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 Biden, Biden, Biden. Where are we going on a global scale? How are the people of the world feeling about these lockdowns? Will they continue? How many people are in poverty? How many people are killing themselves? You know that they said 36% of young people my age have had thoughts of suicide in the past 30 days. 36% of young people aged 18 to 35 have thought about killing themselves. Last time I checked, had killed themselves, then the virus had killed, right? So when we start having situations like that, we have a problem. Because if more people are killing themselves from the restrictions than the virus, shouldn't we start thinking about people's general well-being and or mental health? Something that I had saw today that I thought was decent, okay, not that I thought it was a great idea, but decent. They started carside bingo for older people to go sit in a parking lot and somebody calls out bingo numbers and they sit in their car and they tune their radio so they can hear it. And then they can honk their horn when they get a bingo. And just having that social interaction, and that may not seem like a lot, but for older people who have been stuck in their homes for months on end now, this could be the human interaction that they need to keep them going. People forget that the guy who's talking to you in the grocery store nowadays, or somebody who just takes a little bit extra long to speak with you, we need to start thinking about these people might have not spoken to anyone in a long time and are craving human interaction. And eventually that's going to make people very desperate and do very desperate and unsavory things, right? So I think we need to start pushing back, or at least in our local communities, trying to just push a little bit of kindness out to that next person that we see. Because I think that there's something that we all need to do as people. And the one thing that we can do is support each other. At least try to smile at that person you see in the store. Try to help somebody out. Let's not be afraid for what's going to happen, because if we don't all come together, we won't get anywhere. I just really want to start thinking about some of these things, going back to more of our roots of shows that we used to do. What can we do? What is happening? And where do we go from here? And with that being said, I'm going to get out of here for tonight because I need to go to bed. And I hope you guys enjoyed what we talked about tonight. I hope you found it enlightening. But we need to start thinking about the global, bigger context, because we've only been focusing about our politics really in the USA. And I think that's a wrong move, because we need to watch what everybody else is doing to understand what's going to happen here next. And so, with that being said, from the land of 10,000 lakes, good night, universe.